Hey, Dustin here. I'm going to be talking about the home crisis of foreclosures, the history of it, and how it kind of got to where it is today. Currently, according to Realty Track, some of the worst foreclosure rates in the country are in Florida and Nevada, roughly around 10%, compared to the national average, which is around 6%. Still not as much as Florida and Nevada, but compared to historical rates, we're still pretty bad off. And the reason I feel comfortable speaking about this and feel credible is my fiance and I are currently in the process of purchasing a home, and we've learned a lot about the home buying process, and it's kind of opened my mind in that direction, besides taking my economics course that has also opened up my world in that direction. I currently believe that the big bankers and mortgage brokers are more responsible for the mortgage crisis, the housing crisis that we're dealing with right now, than the average homeowner who foreclosed on their home, or even the average homeowner. And some of the reasons are what I've learned about the approval process and other things I've learned about how mortgage brokers and banks deal with mortgage-backed securities, which I'll explain, and some of the forgeries that they were doing, mainly U.S. Bank and of course, some others, in the process of foreclosures and their documentation forgeries. So let's say, for instance, the first thing that comes to mind when you're purchasing a home is you need pre-approval. You found a home, let's say you found a perfect home, and you need to get pre-approved so you can put in an offer. Now, according to Mortgage X, some of the qualifications you need to prove for a loan is you need collateral. Do you have any other collateral, than what you're trying to put up for the home you're trying to purchase? Do you have like land or whatever it might be to reduce the risk for the bank or the mortgage broker in lending out all that money? Then they also look at your credit score, which shows a history of if you're likely willing to pay it back, do you have any judgments against you, etc., etc. And then there's also, of course, the very important thing of home value, what it is appraised at. And again, according to Mortgage X, you cannot borrow against a home any more than 95% of its value. So it's pretty normal to purchase a home under, at least just under, the appraised value. And in this market right now, it's very much common to purchase a home way under its value. So that brings me to the paperwork. The paperwork you deal with. So let's say you get qualified, and then you have to deal with the paperwork of mortgage. I've kind of been through it, so has my fiance. Roughly 30-40 pages we had to go through of just signing, initialing, and then just negotiations with the loan counselor that you would deal with at the time. So it's a pretty lengthy process. Now this is kind of where the investors come into play. Once you you purchase a home, then technically the bank or the mortgage company owns it. And there's also the secondary path of going through a government loan, but I'll get into that here in a second. And what they do, according to what they do is they bundle them and pool them into what's called a mortgage-backed security, or MBS for short. The mortgage-backed security, according to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, is where either private companies or government agencies will pool mortgages together based on X value, and then project what they're going to return for investment on mortgage rates, down payments, etc., etc. So here's my visual aid, check it out, pretty cool. What we're going to cover first, if you can read that, is the government pools. Now, between 2001 and 2008, according to Housing Wire, there was a total of $10.6 trillion worth of mortgages originated during that time. Now, if you imagine the national GDP around 14, that's still a lot of money. So, they made up 80% of it, the government did, with their programs, which estimated about $8.6 trillion. And I know you can't read that, but I'm trying here. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mae are the federal organizations that deal with these mortgages. Now, it's pretty tough to get a home qualified, or even yourself, more specifically, to get qualified for a government-backed loan. Reason being is because they have their own government inspectors and government appraisers, because they're really looking out for the interest of the money of the government. And they are not, the government has much more invested in the economy than, for instance, a mortgage company or a banker would, because that's where their tax revenue comes from. So in the end, with the more strict process of becoming approved or pre-approved for a loan for a house, mortgage loan, you get a much better, higher quality MBS compared to what we're going to talk about now, the private labels. And the private labels are private pools of firms that basically lent out mortgage loans of anything other than a government organization to an individual. Now they made up about 20% of the total mortgages originated between that time, which ended up being about $2 trillion, thank God. The pretty much brokers, bankers have overvalued the properties that they were lending out for. And the reason being is because they had private recommended appraisers and inspectors for the homes. They don't have as much interest in the economy, so they can, refer out to appraisers or inspectors. This ended up causing, where the individual could easily get a loan because the home would appraise, of course, and pass inspection, which would ended up being a lower quality mortgage-backed security sold to investors because of the less strict approval process. And then who gets stuck with this? The investor. So the bank really didn't have much interest in lending out the money in the first place, considering the fact that they were going to sell it off to investors in the end. Now that we kind of understand a bit of where the mortgages end up, we're going to talk about the documentation and how forgeries are very common in these documentations when dealing with foreclosure specifically. For instance, the mortgage finance community developed a system called MERS, which stands for Mortgage Electronic Registration System. And what they did is they wanted to eliminate all documentation, paper documentation for the mortgage buying process and for selling MBSs, etc., etc. And what that really translates to is them being able to eliminate original documentation from the original purchaser, or from the original process of lending the money out. And the reason they do this is because they wanted to destroy title history. Why would a banker want to do this? Well, here's the reason. They didn't want to register these mortgages and homes that they were selling out through mortgage loans with the counties and save hundreds of thousands of dollars in filing fees to the counties, which have outdated systems compared to the MERS system. And what they ended up doing was destroying these titles so that, for instance, when a home would foreclose, they would be able to forge documentation because there is no original documentation, take it to court, and then they would end up proving to the court through robo-assigned, is what they call it, and a U.S. bank is particularly known for doing this, and then resell the property again on top of what they already made with the mortgage-backed security selling to investors. So the investors have them basically sold out right from under them. They have no original documentation, and then the bank or mortgage broker gets an extra added bonus to the already hundreds of thousands of dollars they've made selling them to investors. So really, it comes down to the forgeries and the resellings and the mortgage-backed securities and why they were so lenient in selling and pre-approving people that they probably knew couldn't repay back the loan, especially when they had no interest in the housing market, compared to what the government did with their stricter loans. So the whole situation really was caused by the mortgage brokers. They didn't have as much interest in the economy as the government did. They had a way more slack approval process. The way that they managed MBSs was fraudulent, to say the least. And then the documentations that they destroyed with their revolutionary MERS system, where they eventually are going to try to have all mortgages on this system, has really caused a lot more problems and really consolidated a lot of money to the banks themselves. And this is why I feel that bankers and mortgage companies are more responsible for the housing crisis than the average individual.